time. This was not a small trip. And, like all self-respecting Jews, he found himself living in Brooklyn and started trying to find the answers to these questions. But his questions were not answered by the Jews. Instead, he found himself talking to Christians to find out about the Messiah. And there's a whole story behind that. But after a while, purely by the grace of God, he came to grips with the reality of Yeshua being the Messiah of the Jewish people. Scripture pointed to it clearly. However, almost as soon as he accepted Messiah, Leopold was faced with another dilemma. You see, shortly before he arrived in New York, there had been a revival in Hebrew roots, or the Jewish faith, in the church, and there were a bunch of people who were preaching about faith being Jewish in the late 1800s, but many of them turned out to be a little bit corrupt, and so the churches in New York City were feeling quite burned at the time, and so they were encouraging all the Jewish people who came to faith to just kind of shed their Judaism, forget about all that other stuff, and come into the church, and we'll take care of you here. It wasn't that they didn't want them, they just didn't think that they didn't want the Jewish part. Leopold, feeling the pressure from that, actually reacted the opposite way. He really felt that because of that, he felt that the Jewish people were being ignored, and it really weighed heavily on him. Not only that, it was killing him that the Jewish people not only didn't know Messiah, but they didn't even want anything to do with him. And so that really frustrated him. Leopold was called. He had a mission. At this point in time, he knew what it was. Not being able to avoid his calling, he kind of found himself sucked into God's grand plan, and he, along with other visionaries since then, have forged a path largely untraveled by the rest of the world. Their vision was to see salvation come to the Jewish people. Through his suffering and suffering of people that came after him, he was beaten, his family was ridiculed, he was disowned, not only by his larger family, but by his wife as well, who actually did later come to faith. That's another story too. But he planted the seed for an organization which has actually become the driving force in Jewish evangelism today. His organization, the Brownsville Mission to the Jews, would eventually come to be called Chosen People Ministries. Over 100 years of Jewish evangelism were made possible simply because the confused young Hungarian rabbi listened to the call of the Lord to seek him. And like the still small voice of Elijah, God was calling Leopold and leading him forward on a path which was not clearly visible to him at the time. And while Leopold's journey may have come to an end, that path is definitely not done yet. There's a lot more to do. So changing pace a little bit, I want to just talk about some characteristics I've learned about calling over the last year. I've learned a lot about it because I've been struggling with it. First, God doesn't always call you to do something that you understand. And I'd refer you back to some of the, Neil's in the back laughing. I'd refer you back to some of the stories that I just shared with you. I mean, you talk about a rabbi that suddenly realizes that he's called to spread the word of Yeshua to the Jewish people. That's confusing for a rabbi, I'll tell you that much. Psalm 37 verse 4 gives us some words to live by on this one, and this is something that I've really started to take to heart. The passage says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." It's not that he will give you the desires of your heart. He will place the desires into your heart, which is something that he helps with. Calling is an endless journey of discovery with the Lord, and while we don't understand right away, the Lord gives us drive and desire to complete our calling even when it initially confuses us. Like, for instance, saying, hey, I want to quit my job and go up to New York to study in seminary at this particular seminary. That can be confusing. Second, calling is not easy. That's why they call it the straight and narrow path. It's always easier to take another road. The Apostle Paul was stoned and left for dead outside the city of Lystra, and his response in a later epistle said, I have seen the third heaven. I think in reality, he really should have said, I need a vacation. That's what I would have said. It's interesting to note, just something that I thought I would throw in there, is that the third heaven, I always wondered what the third heaven was. The Rebbeim have three heavens. They have the sky and the stars, and then heaven. What we call heaven is the third heaven. So basically he had said, I saw heaven. I died and went to heaven, was his response. And he used that as an example. Third, calling is often immediate. This is something which I've had to fight. The prevailing wisdom of the world is to take time and prepare for things before you do them. Definitely not a bad plan. And while this is sage advice for everything or anything, the Lord sometimes asks us to place our faith in him and to jump. It's important to be wise about our decisions, but it's easy to fall into a trap of just prepping forever and ever and not actually getting anything done for the kingdom. And while God calls us, I'm sure he feels a little bit like, Bill Cosby. Have you ever seen where he's like, come here? No, come here. Come here. Come here. He isn't calling us to prepare to come or to look up and say, I'm here. It's not just hineni. He's saying, come here right now. And sometimes he actually says, prepare, which is something that he did say to Noah and Joseph. But you need to listen to what it is that he's saying and do what he's asking you to do. Fourth, calling is not always fair. This is a tough one for people to swallow. It's a tough one for me to swallow. God is not really a fair God. He's a just God. Justice is based on a set of laws. Fairness is not necessarily based on a set of laws. Some people are called back to the Lord before they even have the chance to make a decision to follow him. Others are put into bad situations, or they're abused or taught a seriously poor system of right and wrong, and they end up making bad decisions in their lives. It's not fair. As the body of believers, and also as Jews, we have a driving mandate. It's called Tikkun Olam, which is the healing and restoring of the world, which we understand basically is to share God's love with the rest of the world through service and through evangelism and just trying to make the world a better place. But the reality is that the world is still fallen, and so some may find themselves more blessed than others, simply because someone 300 years ago made a decision that impacts your life today. And it's a sad reality, but it's a reality. Sometimes we're the lucky ones, and sometimes we're not. In the order of calling, some people find themselves called to perform miracles and wield the fire of the Lord, heal the masses, and spread God like wildfire among the nations. Others may be called to use their own blood to save the lives of 2 million children, whether they know it or not. Others might simply be called to clean the bathrooms at the church here. No calling is more important than any other calling, because all of them need to happen for God's kingdom to move forward. And when we answer the calling that God has for us personally, no matter how great or small, something beautiful always comes of it. It's also important to note God's calling extends beyond the four walls of church and into the rest of our lives. Some of us are called or built, if you will, to be rock stars. Others are rocket scientists. Some people are janitors. Some people are called to be missionaries. Some people are called to be theoretical physicists. But, they're just God's special little people, and that's why they do that. But, calling extends beyond the walls of church. There we go. Someone got it. Thank you. And finally, calling is not just reserved for individuals. This was something that I had to really think about. I'm going to put this in your head. God operates with individual people. And in America, we are an individualistic society, so we think in terms of me. But he also operates with larger groups of people and entire nations as a whole. The sins of a nation are carried by everyone in the nation. And so also the blessings of a nation are given to everyone in the nation. And this is kind of the topic that I want to talk to you about today, talking about our calling as a people. God's calling is powerful, and it's driving, and it's something that we can't avoid. We can choose to deny it, but it's kind of at our own peril, because I'm sure he could find a fish big enough to eat a whole nation of people. It's possible. Yeah. During the past semester, I had to write a paper and take a closer look at a chapter of Romans 11. It's a very interesting chapter, and it's quickly becoming one of my favorite because it offers a very clear viewpoint of God's calling for the church and for the Jewish people today. There are a few places in Scripture where God's calling to Jews and Gentiles is made so clear in a post-resurrection era. In verse 29, Paul makes a statement about the Jewish people. He says, "For the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable." Raises some questions. What gifts and what calling is Paul referring to? Is this something which may or may not be applicable to the church as a whole, or is this just to the Jewish people? And so when I was writing this paper, being the person that I am, I like to explore all the sides of an issue, and usually I do that through some extreme methods. I proposed a question to some friends of mine, a few of them are here today, in a web chat, just to see what their reaction was, partly because I like to ruffle their feathers because it's funny, and partly because I really wanted to see what they would say because I respect their opinion. And